Are you trying to record some gameplay footage? Are you looking at a capture card? Are you debating Shadowplay versus OBS? Well, we have all those answers and some more performance testing to see how it affects gameplay footage and FPS. So let's jump into some of this. System specs that we're using are a 9900K 5 GHz overclock. We're using an RTX 2060, which is EVGA factory overclock plus another 5%. And then we are using other system specs. You can check out those above. We'll be testing Division 2's gaming benchmark on Ultra 1080p. We're recording at 60 FPS as well as 40 megabits per second. So those are your main system settings that we're testing. And we're going to look at some CPU performance usage as well as some FPS through a bunch of different tests that we've done, about 11 of. This is for gameplay recording. So I guess we can we'll jump into more system settings and some questions and some other things a little bit later. But basically what we're looking at, if you're trying to record gameplay footage without recording, we have a baseline of 95 FPS with a 70 FPS 1% low, so it'll dip down to there. And we're seeing around a 27 CPU usage. It will jump around 1 or 2 depending on the run through, but we're usually getting 95 FPS every single time. And then we get to see no recording versus Shadowplay. So Shadowplay will use an NVIDIA graphics card, I believe 10 series and above. That will drop down to 92 FPS, so a 3% drop, a 2 FPS drop on the 1% lows, and you're still using really no CPU for rendering or for encoding any of this, so because it's using your graphics card encoder, so that is good there. And then we get to see Shadowplay versus OBS. So this is where it's going to start using your CPU to encode, and we're going to see a 92 to 86 FPS drop, and then a 1% low is about a 3 FPS drop there. And then here's where the CPU usage comes in. So it's going to use 48% of your CPU versus 27. So this is basically the game using 27 and not really any background processes is going on there. So OBS is going to use quite a bit of about 21% CPU usage on a 9900K. So that is quite a lot. And then we get to see OBS, a couple different modes. We're going to now use a hardware encoder, so graphics, back to graphics. We're going to see an 86 to 82 FPS drop. So you're going to free up some CPU usage. Say your CPU is a bottleneck, you're not using a 9900K, you're using a lower end processor. You will see, again, a 4 FPS drop, and then your CPU usage will go back to normal, around 27 for the 9900K. And that leads us into the next OBS mode, which is the new hardware encoder, which you'll see about a 1 to 2 FPS increase. We saw a couple of runs get around 84, but usually 83. So a little bit different there. And then we also have the hardware encoder, the 264, the new one. This is, I believe, for RTX, which they go into some RTX details for the OBS broadcasting. And this is a little bit more streaming oriented of a read. And there's also a video settings. You can actually check out all the different things. We'll leave a link for this. And you can check out their NVIDIA RTX recommended OBS settings for streaming, particularly not recording, which is what we're basically talking about. But we did see a performance increase with the new hardware, about 1 FPS again. And then we get to see OBS NDI. So NDI is going to be you'll be able to use a second computer through your network to actually use that second computer to record or stream, but we're recording this case. And we did see a performance increase, about 87 FPS versus the other OBS options, and 65 for the 1% lows. And again, really not much CPU usage going on here. It was all on the other computer that was going up to like 90%. It was a lower end laptop. So that is a option for OBS using a second computer. You can use NDI. There's quite a few tutorials on YouTube you can search for and get information for that. And then we could jump over OBS versus Elgato, and we have 2 different Elgato tests. Basically Elgato just using your own computer, and that is 84 FPS versus 82 for the OBS software, 83 for the hardware encoders, 87 for the NDI. So you're going to see a little bit of a performance hit or gain depending on the OBS mode. 62 1% lows, 30 CPU usage. Again, it's using the capture card to encode everything. So pretty good there. We'll talk a little bit more about encoder, actual capture cards, and the FPS and stuff going on there in a little bit. But we see Elgato with a second PC, a pretty big performance increase, almost near the regular not recording. So we see this with a second computer. You can just plug the USB from will connect to your computer right into another computer and start recording that way. And you can also stream that way too. So this is a great option. and 92 FPS, 67, 1% lows, 28% CPU usage is gonna not really use anything going on there. And then that leads us into Elgato versus Avermedia. For reference, the Elgato was the 60 HD S is what we're using, as well as the Avermedia LGP2. This is not the 4K version. So we're seeing a 79 FPS versus 56%, 1% lows. So a little bit different versus the Elgato. Elgato on just a regular computer was 84, so Avermedia was about a 79. But Avermedia has some cool different options that you can do. So their unique option is that it can record to an SD card. You can plug a micro SD card into the Avermedia, and it won't use it's a no PC mode basically, and you'll get 93 FPS, so probably similar plus or minus 1 FPS here. So pretty much equivalent to running on a second computer for an Elgato, much better than the NDI option from OBS, and similar to Shadowplay, and almost near the no recording performance impact. So there is that, 69 FPS low, and then that is basically the same exact thing if you were recording from an SD card as recording to another second computer. So 93 FPS, 69 and 27% CPU usage. So pretty good options here. There's also some other options. You could like use a capture card with OBS potentially, or OBS Streamlabs, or you could use a second graphics card, but those are a little bit out of the scope of this and extra a little bit difficult, and there's some issues. We'll leave a link to the second GPU if someone does a nice video of that. There's some issues and stuttering issues with that depending on the game though, so you'll check out that link if you want to know more. It's a pretty long video, you can check it out. And I guess that leads us into some other interesting tidbits. Those are the performance numbers we gathered. We'll be doing a stream specific video maybe later today if you're interested in streaming. And so basically some other little things we can kind of talk about are system, so quality recording. Basically we didn't really do any comparison of actual qualities once it goes up to YouTube. There's compression, and then whatever everyone's watching it on the resolution and everything like that, so we didn't really compare, but you can check out this unlisted video. Again, another link if you want to compare quality. It goes in the same exact order as from no recording, Shadowplay OBS, Elgato Avermedia, and then Avermedia PC in the same exact order. There's 10 different videos that you can see in this 20-minute video. You can compare quality if you are super interested in that. We used Resolve, and we just set it to medium. It was like a 6 gig file. We uploaded 20 minutes, so a little bit of compression going on there, but if you wanted to check that out, it's all there for you to check out. And other quick little questions I guess we can go over. So we were using the Division 2 benchmark. Obviously this is a pretty consistent benchmark, even compared to running through the game FPS wise, it's pretty equivalent. And we use the GeForce drivers 419.67 I believe. Again, HD60 S Elgato versus the Avermedia LGP2. There's a newer 4K pass-through version, not a 4K recording version, but you'll also be able to do, these are $160 capture cards. You can obviously find other ones that will do higher frame rates. So specifically, if you're playing games at more than 60 FPS, these capture cards will limit you to a 60 Hertz panel, so you have to set it back to 60 Hertz if you have like a 144 Hertz panel. So you'll be losing any benefit of going past 60 FPS, and you're probably wanting to look into more expensive capture cards, or if you're just recording, you could use Shadowplay. That's a non-issue with your panel's Hertz. And then other different little things we mentioned, recording rates. So for OBS and all the others, we used 2 keyframes. I'm not sure if Elgato had the 2 keyframe option, but Avermedia also, I believe, had it set at 2 keyframes. Just some of the settings. We left everything at default that we could. OBS, you had to change it to the advanced mode to then input your bit rate. We used 40 megabits, so 40,000 of a bit rate. And the Elgato was capped at 40 megabits, so that was your max quality. And then Avermedia had up to 60, but we did equally 40 across the board for everything. So that is your system settings, your software settings that we were using. And I guess we can go into a couple of different questions that other people might be interested in this kind of performance impact for CPU and everything. So CPU recommendations. not everyone's going to use a 9900K processor with it's just a $530 CPU versus a RTX 2060, which is only $350-ish. So what will you be looking at? Basically somewhere around an 8700K, you'll probably be looking for something equivalent to the graphics card you've purchased, or potentially even spending more on a graphics card. That could usually CPU will last a couple graphics card updates versus different options like that. So that is what you're kind of looking at. Either if you're going for the top of the line, a new CPU budget, you're going to get the 9900K. You're probably going to get a capture card to get the least impact. But otherwise, you're going to be looking at other CPUs, closer towards the $300 range. 8700K, I believe, launched at around $350, so you can probably find them for a little bit cheaper. So that is a good option, a 6-core CPU. And if you really think about it, you're spending $160 on a capture card, and you're also going to be limited to the 60 Hertz depending on which capture card you get, but that is something to think about. So basically you could technically spend $160 more on a CPU, so you could go from an 8700K, a 6-core, to a 9900K, an 8-core, and if you were using OPS or Streamlabs in the first place, then that could be a good benefit because that'll give you some more CPU headroom for some more CPU encoding. So that is an option there. And then different games, technically, as we saw in a lot of our benchmarks, we're only using around 30% of the 9900K. So different games, potentially even Division 2, if we lower the settings and we went up with a higher FPS boost up to like 180, we would see a higher CPU usage. So different games had different impacts depending on the FPS. The different game CPU optimization can be a factor depending on your game. So you'll definitely want to, before you're looking at CPU purchases, check out what your system's using now in CPU performance. So you can check out that with MSI Afterburner. There's hardware info. There's a couple other places that you can download some software to see what your CPU is using versus your graphics card to give you a little bit more an idea. But capture cards are a good option, especially if you're going to use the Avermedia's SD card, and if you're just recording. But streaming, it's this whole own ordeal a little bit, but pretty much similar results. A couple different things. We just did some initial testing. We haven't published a graph yet, but we'll be working on it in another video. So aside from that, that's pretty much all the good recording stuff you can do at 1080p, 60 FPS, 40 megabits. So all that is pretty good for streaming. And again, we'll have a second video with the actual streaming numbers. I believe they're going to be pretty similar, so we'll have to see how that goes. And we have Lulu in the chat saying, wow, that's a lot of info, very complicated, thank you. So go get into some streaming, or I guess recording is what we're looking at right this minute. So pretty good numbers, pretty interesting results. And we'll have another episode tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific with some more tech and game news. And with that, we will be signing out. Pew 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 pew.